After my father James died, his lover Emma and her children harassed my mother and me for 40% of the inheritance. So I stalked her, caught her cheating on her ailing husband, and posted everything online. Hello. So my mother and I are in a very terrible situation right now after my father died a month ago. I did something I don't think was improper, but people close to me believe I went too far, and it's bothering me. So, to provide some context, my father, who is 58 years old, died of a stroke 2 months ago. It was quite unexpected, and no one saw it coming, so it was a great shock for all of us. My mother, 55, and I, 30F, have been attempting to get his affairs in order, and we recently discovered his extramarital affair. My parents had been married for nearly 30 years, and we had no idea my father was capable of doing this. We had a memorial for him, and after that, my mother's work buddy, Linda, 55, came clean to her and confessed to having an affair with my father for the past 12 years. We didn't believe her at first, but she eventually began giving us images and screenshots of her talks and emails with my father. She told us things only we knew about our father, including the secret email address he used to connect with her. Linda and my mother had been friends since they first worked together at the hospital 20 years ago. Even though they weren't tight when Linda quit the job, they'd get together a few times a year for reunions and other events. One of those times, my mother and father went to a retirement party and ran across Linda and her husband. That was nearly 2 decades ago, yet my father and Linda began their 12-year affair at that time, which ended with his death. My mother and Linda had met countless times over the years, and no one suspected anything because my father was an excellent actor, as was Linda. So, when my mother finally learned about the affair, she was devastated. She was already struggling to cope with the loss of her husband, and now she had to deal with the reality that he was cheating on. The saddest thing was that my father claimed to love my mother until his death, and my mother was convinced she was the only woman in his life since she had no reason to believe differently. As if that wasn't terrible enough, Linda and her children began pressing my mother to put her and her children in the will, unofficially, because she believed she deserved something from my father's death because she loved him. She has 2 daughters, both around my age, although slightly younger, and they have been incessantly calling and texting my mother, pleading with her to include them in the will. The will is currently in probate, but the difficulty is that my father phrased it vaguely, and Linda and her children might certainly contest it. Linda forced my mother to tell her the details of the will when she initially came over to tell her about the affair, and my mother couldn't say no because she was so desperate and grieving over my father's death. There was also the fact that Linda lived a really dismal life. Her husband was diagnosed with advanced Parkinson's disease 5 years ago, and she was struggling to accept the notion that he might not live much longer. She quit her full-time career to work from home and care for her husband. Her spouse had attended the same university as my mother and was a senior. He was actually a pretty good guy, which is why everyone felt awful for Linda, including my mother, who has basically lost her mind since my father died. I hate to say this about my mother, but she has never been the most psychologically stable or emotionally strong person, and this tragedy has only disturbed her more. She's done a number of stupid things, the first of which was telling Linda what was in the will. She told me she felt awful for her, despite the fact that the woman had cheated on her husband and ended her marriage. But my mother insisted that she couldn't bring herself to keep the contents of the will from Linda, especially since they were both sobbing about the same man. She had almost agreed to split everything with Linda, but she notified me about it, and I put a halt to it since I was not going to share anything with Linda and her children. She may have been my father's affair partner, but she had no claim to his estate. That was solely ours. I had my mother cut Linda off and block her everywhere. So after a few days, she and her kids began harassing me online. But I'm not my mother, and I'm not terrified. Even though they kept threatening me with exposing my father to the world by publishing the affair, which would be a bad look for me and my family, our reputation would suffer greatly, and there would be unfavourable press for my father's firm, which I was meant to take over. They informed me that the only option for us was to divide the estate and business revenues informally. That way, everyone would be happy, and nobody would have to bear the repercussions of my father's selfishness. But I wasn't on board with that concept and turned down their offer. My mother, on the other hand, was eager to take them up on their offer and kept trying to persuade me to accept their terms. She didn't like that I was debating with them online. Linda's daughter warned me in one chat that we were defrauding them out of what they deserved, and that if this continued, she would be forced to expose us as scammers. So I told her that her mother was the actual cheater in this situation and threatened to notify her father and ruin their marriage if they continued to harass me. The spat had gotten very violent silent, and we were all keeping silent out of fear for our reputation. She stated that she did not believe it was worth fighting them over this because they might go public with the details of the affair. Even though it would harm them and end Linda's marriage, it would also harm us since my father's business and image would suffer and he wouldn't be able to defend himself. So it would be in our best interest to simply agree with them and move on because she didn't want any more drama, and she also didn't want to fight Linda because she felt horrible for the woman. I had planned to tell everyone about the affair myself so they wouldn't have anything against us, but my mother begged me not to, mostly because she didn't think it was necessary to tarnish my father's image after he was gone and that we should instead try to preserve it, but also because she felt sorry for Linda. She had been duped into believing Linda would use the money to assist her family because her husband was no longer in a stable state, so she was begging me to just split everything and sweep everything under the carpet because she didn't want anyone to find out. I was fighting everyone on my own, including my mother, who wanted to lay down and allow Linda and her children to walk all over us because her husband was ill, but I wasn't going to take it. So I went behind my mother's back and decided to look into their family so I could gather more dirt on them and run things my way. I might have gone too far, but I covertly began following Linda to learn more about her daily activity. I followed her for 2 weeks, and fortunately she was too distracted to notice. She would spend most of the day at home with her spouse, presumably caring for, but in the evening, she would go for a stroll and run some errands before going to a coffee shop a little distance from her house and spending about 2 hours there. I had no idea what she would do inside for nearly 2 hours, and I lacked the nerve to go check for the first few days. The coffee shop didn't have clear windows, so it was difficult to tell what was going on inside. But after nearly 2 weeks, I decided to walk in and speak with the barista or something because I wasn't making any headway, and I still had no idea what she would do there. However, I had a gut sensation that something was fishy and felt compelled to investigate. So one day, after Linda had left the cafe, I decided to go in and talk to the barista. I tried to be polite, and I was lucky that the girl behind the desk was also friendly and conversational. After chatting with her for a few minutes, I decided to ask her about Linda. If she was perplexed by the fact that I was asking about another customer, it didn't show on her face, and she instead told me that Linda had been coming to this coffee shop almost every day for the past 2 years. She stated that she always follows the same pattern and order. She would order coffee as soon as she walked in the door, then sit and finish it while waiting for her lover to arrive. The moment the barista mentioned her lover, I recognized that my guess was correct, and she'd been having another affair aside from my father, because, let's be honest, no one needs 2 hours to have coffee alone. Anyway, the barista went on to say that when her boyfriend arrived, which was usually 15 minutes after she arrived, they would take the other exit and exit through the side of the building. Linda would then return in the same manner around 2 hours later and leave through the main exit. That explained why I hadn't seen her leave the building. She had taken the opposite exit, and my car was on the other side of the building. So, following that talk with the barista, I decided to park my car on the other side and finally acquire some proof of Linda cheating. Things transpired exactly as I had been instructed, so I was able to capture some footage of Linda exiting the coffee shop from the side entrance, hand in hand with another man, as they giggled. I even captured a photo of her receiving a kiss on the cheek from her lover. Now that I had the proof, there was only one thing left to do: post what I knew and ensure that Linda and her children quit harassing me for good, which is exactly what I did. I did not consult with my mother and published the post without informing anyone. The only thing holding me back thus far was my mother's notion that if we revealed the truth ourselves, it would somehow make things worse for us. But I didn't care anymore. So I said in the post that Linda was not only cheating on her ailing husband with my father, but also with another man. Nonetheless, she had the arrogance to declare that she loved my father and felt entitled to any portion of his fortune. Evidently, that was a fabrication to obtain something out of my father's death. She didn't love him or anyone else. All she wanted was the money. She probably wouldn't even utilize it to help her family because everyone was so greedy. In the post, I also stated that she and her children had been attempting to blackmail me and my mother into sharing everything with them, and that the only reason I had kept back for so long was that I did not feel comfortable defaming my own father. But now I was ready to admit his flaws and expose Linda for the serial cheater she was. I sent everything to the post, including documentation of Linda and my father's relationship, Linda and her children blackmailing me, and the photos and videos I took of her with her boyfriend. Once it was completed, I posted it without hesitation, confident that I was doing the right thing. However, the reactions of my mother and other close family members have led me to believe otherwise. Everyone hates me now because they believe I wrecked my father's image with that post, simply because I wanted to preserve all of his fortune for myself, and they call me insane for chasing Linda. They accuse accused me of not caring about him as a person and merely posting that message to make Linda and her children less likely to be considered for inheritance, which I agreed with because my father had been cheating. All I had done was admit it publicly, so I wouldn't have to cave in to Linda and her children's demands. My mother feels I was extremely out of line because I utterly wrecked his reputation, especially because there was a good chance he could have gotten away with it if I hadn't opened my mouth for selfish motives. I don't see why everyone is calling me selfish. If anything, my father was selfish in keeping this secret from us for over a decade. I had already lost faith in him, but I wasn't about to let his affair partner cheat me out of my inheritance. Everyone refused to talk to me because they believed I was selfish and entitled, but I don't see anything wrong with my actions. I was simply attempting to protect my inheritance. My father chose to have an affair, and it was my responsibility to expose him and acknowledge his sins after he died. It didn't even have the expected impact on the family's business and image. Some individuals complained that this was messed up, but that was it. Everything is still running as smoothly as before, and I believe people are overreacting and making a big deal about it. If anything, I believe my mother should be grateful that I prevented her from sharing her fortune with the other woman. That would have been pretty insulting if it had actually happened. But Linda has erased all of her social media accounts, and her daughters are no longer harassing me. I believe I saved everyone out here, but instead of being appreciated, everyone is making me out to be the villain, which is making me reconsider my decision. I still believe that exposing my father's reality to the world was a little price to pay for the opportunity to maintain the inheritance without Linda and her children continually hovering over us. Also, I believe we should remember that they were intending to do this all informally, so they may have tried to extort more money from us in the future if we let them get away with it this time, and it was best if we just came clean to everyone ourselves. There was no reason for us to keep it hidden, because neither my mother nor I had chosen to cheat. It had been my father, and now that he was gone, there was no use in attempting to save him or his reputation from something he would never have to face the consequences of. But my mother and I were still here, and I felt it was unfair that we would have to pay the price for his deception and give up our fortune to keep Linda's mouth sealed. That isn't even our fault, and it's absurd to expect us to keep attempting to cover up for a man who showed no respect for us. If he had any respect for my mother or his family, he would never have cheated, and I don't understand why everyone is still defending him. Not being alive does not transform him into a saint, and I believe it is past time for people to understand this, rather than attempt to make me the bad guy. But my mother still doesn't believe it, and refuses to speak with me. It's been quite lonely and challenging, and I'm not sure what to do next. Am I an asshole for exposing my father and his affair partner because she was attempting to extort money from me? Update 1. It is with a heavy heart that I write this update to inform you that I have decided to cut my mother from my life. I don't think we can reconcile after this, because I tried to chat with her a few days ago, and she said the most horrible things to me. I don't think I'll ever recover from it, and I don't want to speak to her again. It had been 3 weeks since she initially stopped speaking to me, but I continued to try to talk to her and persuade her to understand my point of view. Unfortunately, she simply wasn't interested. She believed I had wrecked my father's heritage and reputation and wanted nothing to do with me. It was extremely frustrating for me as well, because I kept trying to explain to her that I hadn't done anything to defame my father. He did it quite well himself, and that it was worthwhile doing so because otherwise Linda and her children would keep the affair over our heads and force us to do whatever she wanted us to do. I tried to explain to her that my father, as well as Linda and her children, were the true culprits here, and that I was just attempting to protect myself and her. The last time I contacted my mother to speak with her, she told me she didn't want to talk to me anymore and was sick and tired of my excuses. She indicated that after this I could only contact her if I wanted to apologize, but she didn't want to hear from me otherwise. I was furious, and I told her that she should feel sorry for me because I was the one who was being shunned simply for telling the truth and attempting to protect us. I reminded her that my father's side of the family was not going to watch out for her, and they had already proven it by turning her against me, despite the fact that I was the one who spoke up and attempted to keep Linda from pushing us even farther into a corner. If my father's family had their way, they would just bury everything and ignore everything, even if it meant jeopardizing my and my mother's future. They didn't care about us. All they cared about was my father's reputation and maintaining their own family name. I was trying to make my mother realize this, but she turned on me and told me that she didn't need me to look out for her, because I couldn't even look out for myself. When I asked her what that meant, she told me that the family intended to exclude me from the will and contest it. So all of my hard work in running behind Linda and proving that she had no real love for my father, and that they were not the star-crossed lovers that she made them out to be, was for naught. My mother told me that I had messed everything up, not just for myself, but also for her, because she was caught in the middle of it all, despite her desire not to be involved in any way. She had merely intended to split the estate and keep it quiet, but I had to be greedy and get my way. And now there were several more people standing in the way of my fortune. My mother reminded me that Linda might still challenge the will and prolong the process. But now I had to worry about my father's family, which was entirely due to my own actions. Apparently, they decided that I no longer deserved to inherit the firm, despite the fact that I was still running it in my father's absence, and none of them had stepped up to accept that role. It was so aggravating that I started crying on the phone with my mother after she told me everything. But instead of comforting me, she began telling me that it was my own fault for not listening to her, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. She went on to say that even if there was something, she would let it happen because she believed I deserved it. That made me cry even harder, since I would expect something like that from my father's family, but not from my own mother, who I had always thought loved me. I had already lost my father, and now I felt as if I was losing my mother as well. But while I was crying, she didn't provide a single word of comfort, instead reminding me that I had caused this entire mess and that I had to clean it up on my own. When I tried to tell her that she was really callous, she told me that I deserved this version of her since I had been selfish and foolish all along. I was still hoping she'd say something nice to make things easier for me, but instead she said she wished I wasn't her daughter and hung up. That was the last time I spoke with her, since I'm not sure I'll ever be able to reconcile with my mother after what she said. I simply can't. Update 2. It's been a couple of days since my last update, and Linda recently contacted me to inform me that her husband's family had forced him to file for divorce from her after seeing the post I had made, and she has now promised me that she will ruin my life just as I have ruined her. Her girls do not appear to be happy about their parents' divorce, and for some reason, they blame me rather than their adulterous mother. It's crazy to me that everyone blames me for things that are clearly not my fault. I've just been speaking the truth and exposing individuals for who they really are. If they don't like it, perhaps they shouldn't act that way. You can't be a nasty person and then become angry when you're exposed as one. That is not how the world works, and it certainly is not how my world operates. So they may blame me all they want, but it won't change the facts, and it will certainly not stop me from telling the truth. I've spent a lot of time worrying about what others think of me, but I'm at the point where I don't care anymore. People will have a problem with me stating the truth, regardless of what I do, because the truth is unpleasant and unattractive, and they despise me for bringing it to their attention so they can no longer ignore it. But that's their problem, not mine. Therefore, I'm not concerned about what people think anymore. My mother and father's families can do whatever they want. It doesn't matter to me anymore. I haven't heard from my mother since our last phone chat, and I hope it stays that way since I don't think I have anything else to say to her. She was cruel to me, and instead of mourning alongside me, she turned against me. I understand that she was furious about a variety of issues, but that does not excuse her behaviour, because I was also concerned about the same issues as my mother. She should have stood by me instead of attempting to hide her husband's flaws, especially since he wasn't even around anymore. But I am still here. It's terrible and tragic that she believes his death absolves him of everything he did wrong. I love my father and will always miss him, but I cannot forgive him for what he did. Maybe my mother can, but she has no right to tell me whether I should or not. So now I'm prepared to fight anyone who stands in my way, and I've realised that I'm on my own. It has always been this way, so whatever. Update 3. Well, it is official. Both my father's side of the family and Linda are fighting the will, but I'm not concerned. I understand who I am and what I deserve. My father's lawyer is also fighting for me, and he's known me since I was a youngster, so if he believes I'm doing the right thing, I most likely am, and I have no cause to be concerned. He informed me that they didn't have much of a case because all I did was expose my dishonest father, and that it was only because Linda was blackmailing me and my mother for part of the fortune that I had to stand up and take action. But aside from that, they have nothing against me, and the best they can do is probably delay the process by fighting it. But my father's lawyer has informed me that he will do his utmost and pull out all the stops in his defence. I can tell he is serious about this, and it makes me pleased to know that someone is on my side, since I truly needed that confidence. My mother is still not communicating with me, but from what I've heard, she has stopped speaking with my father's family as well, and wants nothing to do with them. I got this information from my father's lawyer, who said my mother has entirely blocked everyone out. I was concerned for her, because I didn't want her to do something reckless in her sadness, and I knew she was already having a difficult time dealing with so much at once. I suppose I noted in my original post that my mother had never been the most emotionally stable person, so I considered putting our argument on hold for a time to check on her, but then I discovered that she had moved out of our house with all of her belongings and was now living with her sister, so I guess it's not necessary for me to check on her because she has my aunt to look after her. I miss her. I sincerely hope she will come to her senses and understand that I did nothing wrong. I was only trying to protect us, but now is probably not the best moment because she is suffering from her grief, which is causing her to say and do insane things. So I'll wait for her to come around and understand that I was never her enemy. I've always had our best interests at heart. It's great that she realized my father's family wasn't looking out for her, which is why she cut them off. And I hope to hear from her soon, because I don't want to lose her. I only have one parent today, and regardless of what I said previously, I would love to have her in my life.